Okay, welcome to Among the Thorns, episode 5. I'm going to kind of hop straight into it today. I'm going to try to be a little bit more timely, a little bit more efficient, and we'll see how this one goes. So today we're going to dig into the second part of our discussion on the mental aspects of pornography addiction. Prime among these would be dopamine. So if this is something that you're already familiar with, I probably won't be mentioning anything you've not already heard. But I have talked to people and I've assumed they knew just recently, with documentaries on sugar and things like that. And they didn't. So I'm going to start with the assumption that you know nothing on the topic. Now, I don't really need to go into any real depth. There are plenty of videos that dive into the subject of neurotransmitters, dopamine being, chief among those. But I think gaining even a shallow understanding of dopamine can definitely be helpful. So dopamine is a chemical that the body releases, and I have a lovely picture of it here, because now that you know what it looks like, it's, you're going to understand it so much better. Now, dopamine is commonly understood as creating feelings of pleasure. So it is a naturally occurring chemical that the body releases in interaction with different things that, we may do during our everyday life. For instance, you eat some ice cream, actually. You eat sugar of any type. Your body releases dopamine, makes you feel good. That's largely why sugar is so addictive and why it's so hard to stop. Dopamine tends to be at play in a lot of different addictions, be that social media, video games, pornography, sugar. Dopamine gets a pretty bad rap because of how it plays into addictions. Now, it is actually a good thing. Very much like a lot of other things we've talked about, where sin takes something that is good and natural and meant for a good purpose and corrupts it, we see the same thing with dopamine. It's there to basically reinforce and reward behavior, but unfortunately, the brain will release it indiscriminately, so to speak. Now, where this plays into pornography addiction, you might wonder, well, why is your body going to reward you for not even doing something in real life, for looking up pictures of people online? Now, it is commonly considered, to be a pleasure chemical because it gives you feelings of pleasure. But again, its main purpose, at least as far as we understand it, is to help you remember, it's to help you repeat behavior and to reinforce behavior. So it is there almost an involuntary part of your mental thinking to help you continue to do helpful things, but unfortunately also sometimes unhelpful things. So if you remember in Genesis, God commanded mankind to go forth and multiply and fill the earth. And dopamine plays into that because it pretty much rewards you for behavior that would, for instance, propagate the species. Or at least your brain thinks that's what's going on. Remember, it rewards and encourages behavior, right? That all happens behind the scenes. The brain doesn't interpret whether what you're doing is actually physically going to help you. It's not thinking about that kind of stuff. None of this plays in the frontal, prefrontal cortex, the decision-making centers of the brain. This all kind of happens automatically behind the scenes. So when you engage in pornography use, your body releases dopamine just like if you were engaged in physical intercourse. And it's actually not just dopamine. There are 4 main neurotransmitters that are at play during sexual activity. Dopamine is what gives you feelings of euphoria or pleasure. Serotonin, which is a mood balancer, kind of makes you feel good, levels out your, I can't think of the word, like mental, you don't feel angry, you don't feel depressed afterwards. It's why you tend to feel good for just a little bit until the shame and guilt and all that kicks in. Oxytocin is a bonding hormone, and that plays an enormous part in creating these unhealthy triggers. And we'll talk about triggers probably in maybe the next episode while we're talking about mental things, because that has a lot to do with the addictive part of things as well, and the things that trap us, that kind of lead us astray when it comes to us trying to gain control of our own behaviors. And finally, also adrenaline. There are people that are adrenaline junkies that seek that out, jumping out of airplanes, doing the extreme sports, just because the high that you get from adrenaline can be so addictive as well. So it's not just dopamine that you can get addicted to. Now, these are all four at play, and they're all also at play when it comes to pornography, even though you are not engaging in actual physical intercourse. Your body is not aware of that, which is part of why it's a little, and remember I mentioned oxytocin. Oxytocin being that bonding hormone. Well, you can bond with the surrounding, the setting of what you were doing. That's why, if you constantly are looking at your telephone while you're on the toilet, you bond to that behavior. And if you then are looking at pornography, you link those two things together, and it makes it very addictive. That I don't want to get into with this episode, though. We'll get into probably triggers, brain rewiring, and then cravings, I think, in the next episode. I wanted to do a quicker episode today, just really to make sure I get a video out, but also I want to see if it's a little easier for you guys to sit down and listen to it. Now, I do want to highlight a Bible verse that plays into all of the topics that we've been talking about. Uh-oh. No, this is problematic. I was all like, oh, I'll put the words up on the screen, except I've got it zoomed in too much. I'll just read it off. This is in 2 Timothy. And Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says, "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that." And I want to add, don't become a person like that. That last part of that verse has really stuck in my head for years now. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. We are not destined to be trapped. We are not destined to, as it says, love pleasure rather than God. We're not destined to have no self-control. These are all things that here Paul is telling Timothy is part of the world. It's not supposed to be part of the church. So keep that in the back of your mind when you are approaching these topics, that we are called, we are chosen, and it is not that we are called to be this kind of person. God expects more of us, and the good news is that He knows we can deliver on that expectation. Not putting words in God's mouth, but, reading through the Bible, you can definitely gather that. You can infer that from Scripture. And so while reading that can actually be, I think, maybe what's the word, causes shame or your conscience, causes your conscience to be pricked. Just be aware that the end result is that you are not going to be this person. So anyway, 10 minutes for this video. I hope that's a little bit better. Like, subscribe, that way you get all the upcoming content that I'll be making. I'm going to try for 3 videos this week instead of 2. See if I can keep them a little bit shorter, a little bit more frequent. Be of more use that way. We'll see. Thank you very much. Have a good night.